Welcome back to Mudwalkers. My name is Chris. Today we're doing part 3 of our review of Christian Body, a book by Aaron Frost, defending naturism from a Christian perspective, and I am so psyched about this book, as per usual. If you are just now getting into this series, check out the rest of the playlist up here to watch the videos in order, because the book probably builds on itself. Anyway, let's dive into the book. Here's the book. Before we get into it, check out the link tree in the description down below. It has a link where you can support me financially on Patreon. You'll also find my Vimeo channel and my Instagram, etc., down there. Check it out. No pressure. Let's get into this. In this section of his book, Aaron goes over some anthropological examples that are really illustrative in dealing with how humans have treated modesty, the body, clothing, nakedness, across history and across cultures around the globe. And I think this is one of the most powerful tools that naturists have in dealing with American Christian modesty, so-called, or as Aaron puts it so eloquently, porda, which is essentially what you think of as modesty in modern parlance, whereas modesty in its more archaic usage back in, say, like probably the 1800s or so, modesty meant, you know, being unconcerned with gaining some kind of notoriety for yourself. So modest dress would be, you know, dressing normal and not trying to like draw a bunch of positive adulation to yourself through what you wore. So modesty in dress would be that way. You also see the word modesty still used this way when people are saying, you know, like, oh wow, Tim did great with his assignment this week. He's gonna get his bonus. Tim, you're our hero. We can't believe you got this done. Tim says, no, really it was nothing. And someone says, oh Tim, don't be so modest. What are they saying? Are they saying, oh Tim, don't pull your sleeve down so much. Oh Tim, don't raise your neckline so much. Oh Tim, don't, you know, drop your skirt. It's, what they're talking about is stop trying to avoid notoriety. Stop trying to, stay kind of neutral and normal in your reputational appearance here. That's the older, more common use of modesty. Nowadays, we think of modesty in terms of trying to avoid sexual notoriety, so to speak. You're trying to avoid people being sexually attracted to you, is what it means for a lot of modern Christians. And that's just not what it means in Scripture or in the older usages of it in English. Wow, that was a long rabbit trail on the word modesty. Okay, let's move on now. A big part of the reason why this is so important in dealing with American Christians in terms of modesty is that a lot of American Christians seem to be under this impression that it's universal across the human species that everyone covers basically the same parts of the body as Americans do, when this is just demonstrably untrue. And Aaron does a good job of illustrating this in his book, of demonstrating it, as we say. And then what this can show the American Christian is that this is not universal, because what people tend to do is they tend to assume that their own intuitions about the body are universal, innate, and self-evident. And what these anthropological examples do is they demonstrate almost inarguably that that's false. American modesty is not universal, innate, or self-evident. There's a culture Aaron talks about in the book where they only cover the breasts, female breasts, and everything else is left uncovered. That's like the opposite of what you'd expect as an American Christian, but it's true. So the anthropological section is actually my favorite section in Aaron's entire book, because I feel like it's one of the most powerful things that we have. So in case you haven't heard this from me before and you're new to the channel, etc., let's go over some examples. And once I say a lot of these, they'll click and they'll sound familiar from other things that you've probably heard about historically or in school. So let's just start with Africa, right? We all know about, say, topless or naked tribes in Africa. And then let's go north a little bit and you get to the Greco-Roman region, Southern Europe, and we all are probably fairly familiar with the fact that Greco-Roman, say, art and sports had a lot of nudity in them. There was a lot of public nudity in the Greco-Roman world. Not as much as to say that they were like naturists, because they weren't, but it was a lot more than like an American would expect. Then you go farther north than that, and you have the pagan barbarians of, say Bronze Age or Iron Age Europe. Lots of nudity in there. Then if you head east, you get into the Middle East, and there's lots of Bronze Age art depicting people all over the Middle East and Mesopotamia naked in public, and we know that there were a lot of naked slaves and things. People were naked all over the place in the ancient Middle East. Oh, there's also Egypt, which I forgot to mention, in Africa. We've probably all seen the nudity of the hieroglyphs. Egyptians were fairly accustomed, at least in certain parts of their history, to nudity, public nudity. And then you move farther east, and you get into Asia, obviously, Asia proper. And historically, there was a lot of nudity out in certain parts of Asia as well. This would include Japan, of all places. There used to be a lot more, say, co-ed onsens or hot springs, where people would bathe communally as families and in mixed, co-ed settings. And then if you go farther east and then into the south, what you end up with is the tropical Pacific. We've all heard the stories and probably seen pictures too of naked or nearly naked natives, especially from years ago, in prior decades or centuries, who were almost naked or completely naked in the tropical Pacific. Then we come right to our home continent here of North Central South America, this landmass over here. And a lot of people don't know that in North America there was a lot of nudity among a bunch of the tribes up here. There was a lot of it going on in Central America with the indigenous peoples all over Central America. And then in South America, just think of Amazonian tribe, and you can picture it, right? These naked people running around the jungle wearing little or nothing. The Waorani, for example, they just wore a string right around the height of the navel, or like say the hip bones, like a waistband like you would expect. The women wore these and the men wore these, but they didn't wear anything else except maybe some like ornamentation like bracelets or something maybe. And that's like not what you'd expect from an American evangelical perspective on, say, the innate, universal, self-evident nature of this instinct to cover up. So what it shows is that this is far from universal, it's far from innate, and it's far from self-evident. These cultures would have no idea what you were talking about. But no matter where you go in the world, people tend to find their own modesty standards universal, innate, and self-evident. Everybody tends to see it that way. For example, that one tribe that only covers the breasts, their rationale for that, as they were talking to outsiders about it, was, well, everyone can see your penis since you're a baby. So why would you cover that up? Everyone knows about that. That's the same as you grow up. Or about a vagina, the same thing. Or a butt, an arm, a leg, all those same things. But the only part of the body that radically transforms, they said, is a woman's breasts. And so as those transform, you have to cover them. Okay, that's not really like universal, innate, or self-evident. But it seemed that way to them. It just seemed obvious that, that was going to be a major problem if you didn't do it. But whereas the rest of us go, well, naturists especially go, that's not really, no, it doesn't make a lot of sense. On page 145, Aaron points out two instances of cultures that were naked or nearly naked historically. In 1898, after many years in Azimba, Africa, H. Crawford Angus writes, quote, "It has been my experience that the more naked the people, and the more to us obscene and shameless their manners and customs, the more moral and strict they are in the matter of sexual intercourse," close quote. Very interesting. The more naked they got, the more chaste they became sexually. In 1897, Sir H. Johnston noted that despite the complete nudity of the people in Africa, whom he had studied for 7 years, they were completely chaste and never indecent in any way. That would be sexually, I imagine. He remarks, quote, "It may be safely asserted that the Negro race in Central Africa is much more truly modest, is much more free from real vice than are most European nations," end quote. Aaron Frost goes on to note here that as Western customs and traditions and things around the body and clothing got introduced to Africa, we end up with Africa becoming a much more sexually promiscuous place, which leads to, all the sexually transmitted disease problems they have over there now. Whew, when you don't drink enough water, you start to mumble. My goodness. So contrary to what modern American Christians would expect, the effects of nakedness and modesty have the reverse effects that you would expect. Because as it turns out, the nakedness has a positive impact on society, whereas the introduction of a purdah modesty standard has the opposite effect. It actually is toxic to the culture, sexually speaking. It also goes to illustrate the thing that we mentioned a few minutes ago, which was that this whole thing about modesty being universal, self-evident, and innate, it's not those things, because other cultures just flat out have a radically different view of the body and modesty than we do. And Aaron goes over a lot of specific anthropological examples of cultures that have really, really different, and Americans would even say bizarre and absurd standards around the body that these cultures see as universal, innate, and self-evident. That it's just obvious, this is how you're supposed to dress. I'm not going to give those away. Go read the book yourself. But they're super interesting. I will mention a couple interesting stories, though, because, well, they illustrate the problem, but they also are they're really fun stories. To this day, one of my favorite examples that Aaron Frost gives is of an anthropologist who was going through this particular region, and this group of naked people, totally naked, see him coming, and they go, whoa, that's new. So they go running up to see this guy, still naked, but before they did that, they made sure to cover up their faces so he couldn't see their faces. The rest of them, you know, who cares? But like the face, no, that's bad. You may also recall a story that I told in a previous video about a European happening upon some co-ed communal nudity in Japan and remarking, you know, hey, doesn't this seem kind of like, I don't know, inappropriate and like obscene to you? And a Japanese person immediately turns around and goes, bro, this is like normal life. What's wrong with you? Are you some kind of pervert? Why would you like sexualize this? What's wrong with you? Needless to say, I really like that story, because who's the real pervert there? The guy who's just like going about his normal life, scrubbing his armpits around everybody, which is just what you did in the culture? Or the guy who comes in and goes, wow, wow, this is like turning me on. Which one is the pervert? You tell me. And like I said, there are a lot more examples in the book that I won't spoil in this video. By all means, please go and buy the book. It's super affordable on Amazon or wherever else you can get it. I got mine on Amazon. It's a great book. There are more examples. I'm bumping my microphone because I'm so excited about the book. It's not because I'm incompetent and clumsy. It's because it's because I like the book, okay? Like I said, the anthropological section is actually really, really useful in combating the idea that the American standard of modesty is universal, innate, and self-evident, because it shows that it just isn't. Moving on. Patreon time. That's right, this episode of Mudwalkers has been brought to you by Patreon. These guys are my patrons right here. These guys are making the channel happen. You could be a patron too if you wanted to. There's a link to Patreon in the description down below in my Linktree. There's also the link by itself on, down there next to the Linktree. It'll also appear up here on the screen in a moment. I'm talking too fast. Like I said, Patreon is really making the channel happen. It's making my work sustainable. I can't thank you guys enough for what you're doing on Patreon. The tiers are very reasonable. They start at $5 and they go on up from there. Starting at the $10 level and above, everyone gets access to a monthly video call with me and the other patrons. It's a great time to share stories and swap ideas and just in general hang out and have fun. It's one of the highlights of my month, honestly. And I'm very grateful for what Patreon is making possible here at Mudwalkers. I've been able to travel a bit and meet people I wouldn't have met otherwise, including some trips to some naturist resorts that I've done already and that I'm going to do further on for the year. And we'll see how that all goes. It's all thanks to Patreon, and if I speak about it anymore, I'll be rambling, so let's get back to the video. The last part of Aaron Frost's section on culture is titled Clothing Standards in Bible Times. Oddly enough, this section deals mainly with the standards of nakedness and modesty in early art Oddly enough, this section deals mainly with the standards of nakedness and modesty in early Christian art outside the Bible. Early Christian art and practice. We've discussed a lot of these on the channel before, things like naked fishermen being portrayed not only in the Gospels, but also in period art, often inside church buildings. Nakedness of the lower classes, like slaves or widows, and the naked baptisms of the early church. I really appreciate the fact that Aaron cites his sources in this section, because it's really important for our brothers and sisters in Christ to be able to cross-check his information and verify its authenticity, because this stuff is actually out there. So I encourage you, even if you're a textile, buy this book and check out his sources, because they hold up to scrutiny. Of course, I would say that as a naturist. If I get something wrong there, by all means, let me know and I'll make a video about it. People seem to forget that the reason that I'm a naturist now is because I changed my mind based on the evidence. So if you have evidence that will change my mind on something, I'm gonna tend to be fairly open to that. So by all means, reach out. Right now, I'm gonna focus on two of Aaron Frost's big points in this section. Number one, he points out that a lot of the art that we see in early Christian worship centers features explicit nudity, including things like penises. If the usual modern idea of Christian modesty was already in place in the early church, then it becomes very difficult to explain why early Christians went out of their way to make sure that anatomically full frontal depictions of naked men went up in the church building next to where the guy was going to be preaching. You're going to argue, as a textile, that the early church had the same view of modesty as we do, roughly speaking. So are you going to put up a picture of a naked man next to your stage where your pastor preaches? I've never seen it before. It's not going to happen. So the idea that they had the same view of modesty at the time just really seems out of place when you have this art in the church. Not just in the church, capital C, the people, but like the building itself. So clearly the situation is a lot more complicated than all Christians have always just kind of known this same modesty thing. It's a lot more complicated than that. And we know that previous generations disagreed about modesty because we've seen it happen, right? Think about the 1800s. Look at the things people were wearing at the time, the standards and the reasoning why they wore the things that they did. Nowadays, you're walking down the sidewalk, you see a man or a woman wearing a t-shirt, shorts that go down to the knees, and tennis shoes. No one bats an eye. That's like just regular people. Go back 100 years. The man would be seen as extremely out of place and basically walking around in his underwear. The woman would have been arrested for indecent exposure. That's not even going back to the 1800s. That's the 1900s, okay? And then Christians look at these varying standards as they loosen over time to our generation. We always think that our generation is the liberated generation, the, enlightened generation. We're the ones that loosened the shackles of the unnecessary scruples and rules of the previous generations. So the people who raise up the short lines and people who shorten the sleeves, like, these are all seen as good things when we do it. But when the next generation does it, it's obscene. So any standard that's more lax than our own is immediately called out as immodest. Just leave the shirts outrageous. Trousers on women, the horror. Well, that makes sense though. Shirtless men, they will lead the women to lust. It actually doesn't. Shorts on women, the world is ending. Actually, no, it's just knees, bro. So when we look at the previous loosening of the modesty standards, the previous shifts all look fine to us. They're shrug-worthy. Oh yeah, so they raised up the short length, whoop-de-doo. Now women wear pants, whatever. But the moment someone suggests that we keep on with this trend and loosen things a bit more, suddenly we're the heretics. When we're just doing what people have been doing for the last 150 years. So, let's take Southern Baptists, for example. You go to a church function, and you'll literally see girls showing up to church in shorts this short, where if the girl walks, they go up to here, okay? I've seen this within the last month at my church. The girls just wear, it doesn't bother me. I'm a naturist. I'm used to seeing everything, okay? It doesn't bother me. But it does confuse me, okay? Because it comes all the way up to here and not seen as a problem. But if you can see 2 more inches of the woman, suddenly the world is going to come to an end. Also, if you can see the goofiest part of human anatomy, that's suddenly like the end of society as we know it. Or also, like, part of the reasoning around why certain parts of the body are seen as normal and other ones aren't is because everyone has them. Like hands, everybody's got hands. But we can show these because everyone has them. Everyone has faces. Men and women both have faces, so we're allowed to show those. You're not allowed to show a woman's nipples, but you can show a man's nipples. Everybody's got nipples. How does that make sense? Ah, and before you protest that no, it's because women's nipples are shaped different. So are people's faces. You can look at somebody and know whether he's a biological man, whether she's a biological female. Just by looking at people's faces, typically speaking. You also have men with oversized, pretty feminine looking, prominent nipples. And you have women with really small, less prominent nipples, which if you took a close-up of a large nipple on a man, it would look like a woman's nipple. If you took a close-up picture of a small, less prominent nipple on a woman, you'd think it was a male nipple. So this whole thing about, no, it's because they look different. No, they don't. Okay? A nipple is a nipple. There are bigger nipples and there are smaller nipples. But we all have nipples. I'm saying nipples a lot. So all that to say that the moment someone loosens the standard more than our generation did, it's seen as obscene. But our loosening of the standards is always fine for some reason. Food for thought. Number 2, Aaron looks to the early church fathers to look at the way baptism was done in the early church. He cites the same early church fathers as I have in previous videos, which are Cyril of Jerusalem and Hippolytus of Rome. Did I get the names backwards? But regardless, both of these men give really detailed instructions on how to conduct baptism according to them. And both of them say, in no uncertain terms, you're not allowed to wear anything into the water that isn't a part of your body. Now, I think that you could have correlations in their day to our day. Let's say that someone was shot in battle in the Roman Empire. He was going up north and he went up into the mountains and he found this obscure tribe that was still using stone tools and weapons. The Roman soldier gets pierced through with a stone arrow. They pull the shaft out, but the arrowhead stayed lodged in his rib cage. Well, he's going to live with that arrowhead the rest of his life. And so then he goes to get baptized. It's not like the Holy Spirit is going to be like, hey, you're not supposed to bring anything in there but your body. So now you are damned because you have a rock inside. No, so like when people ask about, okay, so Chris, you're saying that people can't bring anything with them into the water. So what about like, the little digestive things people wear? Or say like, I don't know these medical terms, the thing that goes in your throat, or a pacemaker, or plates, or screws from surgeries. These become a part of your body. They're synthetic, they're prosthetic, but they become a part of your body. So I say those are fine to bring into the water. But clothing and jewelry are specifically prohibited by both Cyril and Hippolytus, which is not insignificant. Now, one thing a textile could say about this is, okay, what if the baptisms were gender segregated? Because there is evidence that some of the baptisms done in the early church, like around the time of Hippolytus and Cyril, were actually gender segregated. You'd have a baptismal service for the men, you'd have a baptismal service for the women. There's some evidence that that actually happened. I think it's a stretch to say that they were all gender segregated, especially the ones in the New Testament, but I digress. Let's just concede for the sake of argument. So if it was gender segregated, and that's what made it okay, let's do the same thing. Let's have a worship service where you have only women in the building, and all the women who are going to get baptized nude. No jewelry, no makeup, no clothes, no underwear, no swimsuit, nothing. Just her. Oh, we couldn't force people that. Or let's have a service where there's only men in the building, and the men have to strip naked to participate in the baptism. How about we do that, since that's okay? We couldn't force people out of the homosexuality. So what that seems to show is that it's not as okay as a lot of us want to think. I've said in previous videos, I'm never going to baptize somebody who has clothes on, because I've studied why baptism was done that way. And it makes sense to me. So I'm going to do it the way that the ancient Jews did it, the way that the ancient Christians did it, the way that Jesus himself did it, the way John the Baptist did it, which is the person I'm baptizing will be nude. That's just how it works. That is what baptism is. On my view, if you're going to wear clothes into your baptism, you might as well get rid of the water. There's a whole video about that right here, where I go over some of the historical theological stuff that goes into baptism in the ancient world. But I stand by that. If you're going to wear clothes in your baptism, you might as well get rid of the water too, because it's lost its meaning. All that to say, if you're going to gender segregate the services, then let's just do it. People still say no, so that's not really the issue, is it? Food for thought. That's it for this installment of a review of Christian Body by Aaron Frost here on Mudwalkers. Be sure to check out the rest of the playlist and the later videos in this playlist. If you're watching this in the future, check out the rest of my content. Make sure you like, share, subscribe, follow me on Vimeo, support me on Patreon if you can. Oh my goodness. And yeah, just check out the links in general. Stay tuned for more. That's it for this video. I will see you in the next one, unless I bonk myself in the head here. Whoosh. Welcome back to Mudwalkers, everybody. My name is Chris, and we are here in part 3. Made a mistake.